Usually when we talk about war on this deep dive, we're dealing with the tangible stuff.
Yeah, things you can actually map out.
Right, exactly. Maps, supply lines, drone strikes, things you can see on a satellite feed. But I was reading through the document for today's deep dive, and it frames the entire history of the world as a war. Just not one you'd ever see on the news.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking for tanks or trenches, you are in the completely wrong place with this one.
It describes a conflict with no front lines, no headquarters, and an army that, technically speaking, doesn't even exist on paper. Yet, according to this text, the people running the world, the powers that be, are absolutely terrified of it.
It is such a compelling hook. We're looking at a source document today titled The Thorn. And I think the best way to describe it is just unsettling. It really doesn't read like a typical theological treatise or some sort of Sunday school lesson.
It feels more like a manifesto, or maybe a dossier found in a bunker somewhere.
Manifesto is the exact right word. It's highly poetic, it's dense, and it treats the kingdom of Christ, which is a phrase we hear a lot in religious circles and maybe just sort of take for granted, as something completely different. It frames it as a spiritual insurgency.
An undercover operation.
Exactly. An operation running deep inside a hostile world system.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to decode this manual. We're going to look at the hidden mechanics of this insurgency, figure out who exactly they are fighting, and honestly, try to understand why the text insists this invisible army is actually winning.
Because looking at the state of the world right now, it doesn't exactly look like the good guys are winning.
Right. And that's the central tension, isn't it? The massive disconnect between what you and I see on a daily basis and what this text claims is actually happening subterraneanly.
To understand the insurgency, you really have to look at how the document says it started. Think about most revolutions. They want to be seen. You storm the Bastille, you sign the Declaration, you broadcast your demands.
You make a lot of noise. You want the history books to record the exact moment you took charge.
Precisely. But the Thorn describes the arrival of this kingdom as, and this is a quote, as dew comes to the grass.
I circled that exact line in my notes. Uninvited, unrecorded, already at work before the sun noticed. It is such a quiet, almost eerie image for a revolution.
It's a very strategic contrast. The text argues that the King Jesus didn't ask for permission from the Roman Empire. He didn't check in with the religious authorities or register his movement. He simply began. He spoke of a dominion without borders and a power that disperses rather than consolidates.
And that's a key concept we need to unpack. Dispersal versus consolidation. Because usually power is all about hoarding, right?
Always. Gathering resources to the center, building the capital city, protecting the throne room.
But this insurgency sends its operatives out. And this is where the text gets incredibly paradoxical. Jesus says his kingdom is not of this world. That's the famous line everyone knows. But then he turns around and sends his people directly into the guts of that very world. They call themselves ambassadors.
But the text takes real issue with that title, or at least it completely redefines it. When you think of a real-world ambassador, what's their job?
I mean, I picture a guy in a nice suit, diplomatic immunity, going to state dinners.
Right, they wear the sash, they negotiate treaties, they try to find a middle ground between two powers, they seek favor with the host government to get, favorable trade deals. They're part of the system.
And the Thorn argues these operatives are absolutely not doing that.
Not even close. The source argues they behave much less like diplomats and much more like saboteurs. It says they carry no insignia, they swear no oaths to the visible order, and they seek no favor with the governors.
They aren't there to negotiate a peace treaty. They are there to announce a verdict that has already been decided.
It completely changes how you read those ancient texts. It's not a message of let's all get along. It's a message of your system is expiring.
Which brings us to a part of the text that shifts metaphors entirely. It goes from political to biological. And I have to be honest, this part was a little visceral, a little gross.
You're talking about the parasite metaphor.
Yeah. The endoparasite. Usually in religious text, the believers are the healthy body and the sin is the infection. This document flips that completely upside down. It says the kingdom acts like a parasite inside the fallen world.
It is provocative, and I think the author meant to shock the reader there.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at the biology of it, it fits the argument perfectly. An endoparasite lives inside the host. It feeds on the host. It doesn't kill the host immediately because it needs the host to survive for a while, but it consumes it entirely from within.
So in this metaphor, the host is the world system, the empires, the economies, the power structures.
Exactly. The text calls it hollowing it out. The insurgency doesn't blow up the government buildings. It eats the loyalty that keeps those buildings standing. It replaces the internal logic of the empire with the logic of the kingdom.
So it's a quiet devastation. It's taking the energy that used to go to Caesar and quietly diverting it to Christ, but without Caesar necessarily noticing until it's far too late.
That is the exact mechanism. And because it operates inside the host dispersed, hidden in the bloodstream, the ruling powers literally cannot target it. You can't bomb a network that has no headquarters.
And you can't decapitate a movement that views death as a promotion.
Which makes them fundamentally impossible to threaten.
Right, which naturally brings us to the other side of this war. If there is an insurgency, there has to be a regime they are actively fighting against. The text calls him the adversary, or the dragon.
And here is where the psychological profile gets genuinely fascinating. If you look at the world, or what the text calls the adversary's kingdom, it looks incredibly strong. It is loud. It builds pyramids, skyscrapers, massive standing armies. It constantly screams about how powerful it is.
It's got the branding down to a science, the statues, the military parades.
But the source asks us to look at why it is so loud. It makes the case that this massive display of strength is actually a mask for profound insecurity.
This is the bully in the mirror concept.
Yes. The text describes the adversary as flexing in the mirror, chanting affirmations like, I am strong, I am eternal, specifically because he knows he isn't. He is terrified.
Because he knows there is something inside his system, this parasite that he cannot control.
Exactly. So the monuments, the totalitarian control, the surveillance, that is not strength. That is panic. He is trembling behind locked doors. And because he is terrified, he lashes out. The text outlines two main strategies the adversary uses to fight back. The first one is pretty obvious. Extraction.
Which is persecution, trying to physically rip the insurgents out of the body.
Right. Kill them, jail them, silence them. But as we just discussed with the parasite metaphor, that usually backfires. It just spreads the infection further. It creates martyrs, which act like seeds. So when extraction fails, the adversary switches to something much, much more dangerous. Imitation.
And counterfeits.
If you can't beat them, confuse them. The source says the adversary produces seductive counterfeits of the kingdom. He creates movements that look like the insurgency. They might use the exact same vocabulary, maybe even some of the same religious symbols, but they are powered by the old system: dominance, force, and control.
Now, the source actually names names here. It provides a specific list of these counterfeits or aberrations. And reading this list, I genuinely did a double take. It is a very jarring mix of groups.
It is a highly controversial list, historically speaking. The text explicitly lists Christian nationalism, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which is the Nazis' Christian Zionism, and Mormonism.
Okay, we need to pause there for a second. That is a heavy, heavy list. You have modern political movements, a genocidal regime from the 1940s, and religious groups all thrown into the exact same bucket. As neutral observers here, what is the common thread the text is drawing? Why does it group the Nazis with, say, Christian Zionism?
It all comes down to the mechanism of power. The text isn't necessarily equating their specific crimes. It is comparing your roots. It argues that all of these are kingdom-shaped idols. They promise the things the true kingdom promises: salvation, order, ultimate truth, community. But they try to achieve those things through the adversary's methods.
Meaning state power and violence?
State power, bloodlines, strict borders, and truth enforced by law. Take the Nazis, for example. They heavily utilize religious language. They promise a 1,000-year Reich, which is literally a millennium concept. But they tried to bring it about through racial purity and absolute violence. The text views that as the ultimate counterfeit kingdom.
And Christian nationalism. That is a massive buzzword today. How does the text frame that?
The source argues it relies on the exact same mechanic. It attempts to legislate holiness. It tries to use the sword of Caesar to do the work of the Spirit of Christ. The source says these movements borrow the vocabulary of the insurgency while secretly pledging allegiance to the throne it opposes.
That is a stinging critique. It's essentially saying you cannot arrive at the right destination if you insist on taking the wrong vehicle.
The text is absolutely ruthless about this. It says the masks slip and the fruit betrays the root. Eventually, you cannot hide that you are just another worldly power system relying on coercion. And because they are built on that wrong foundation, on the sand of the world rather than the rock of the kingdom, they inevitably collapse. Time exposes them.
Which leads us directly to the title of this deep dive, The Thorn. We've talked about the parasite and the counterfeits, but what exactly is the thorn? Because the text makes it clear it's not a weapon you hold in your hand.
No, it is a medical metaphor again. It is an internal injury. The thorn represents the sheer presence of the true kingdom embedded in the flesh of the adversary. It is a constant irritation that cannot be located or removed.
There is this hauntingly beautiful section in the text about when the thorn actually hurts the adversary the most. It says it aches when mercy appears where cruelty should rule, or when prisoners sing.
Or when the poor refuse to spare. Think about the mechanics of a tyranny, or even just a highly brutal corporate system. The adversary system relies on fear and despair to control people. That is the fuel. So when someone in a totally hopeless situation, a prison camp, a hospital ward, a war zone, when they refuse to despair, when they actually sing, it breaks the logic of the system.
It's a glitch in the matrix. It fundamentally shouldn't be happening according to the rules of the world.
Exactly. It is living proof that the regime is not total. The source says this pain, this thorn, drives the adversary completely crazy. It is a constant throbbing reminder that he does not own the human soul. So he tries to perform surgery to get it out.
The failed surgery.
He purges dissidents, he builds stronger borders, he demands purer doctrines. He's frantically cutting into his own body to remove the infection.
But like we said with the endoparasite earlier,
you can't cut it out without killing yourself. The text says the insurgency is embedded in the nervous system of the reign. To remove it would be to dismantle the host entirely. So the adversary just has to live with the pain. He has to live with the terrifying knowledge that the enemy is already inside the walls.
that is such a massive shift in perspective. Usually you think of the good guys as the ones outside the fortress trying to break in. This says, no, we are already in the living room and we are not leaving.
And we aren't just sitting there. We are actively consuming the loyalty that keeps the house standing.
Speaking of the house, the source material goes into this very cinematic, almost psychedelic mapping of the adversary's face. It calls it a composite visage, and it seems to be pulling heavily from the book of Revelation here.
It is. And this is where the highly poetic nature of the text really shines through. It argues that the adversary hides behind a mask stitched together to look respectable. And this mask is made of two women.
Right. Babylon and Jerusalem.
The alliances. On one side, you have Babylon, described as the great prostitute. Now, the text defines this very specifically as apostate Christianity or apostate Judaism that has traded the cross for political access.
She reclines on imperial power.
Right. She sells holiness. She represents the religious institution that gets in bed with the state to gain influence, funding, or protection. She represents corruption by indulgence. She essentially says, whatever the emperor wants is what God wants.
And the other woman.
Apostate Jerusalem, the eldest sister. The text describes her as the one who refused the Messiah. She guards the law fiercely but denies the Lamb. She represents corruption by exclusion, withholding holiness. Her stance is, we have the truth and you don't.
So Babylon sells out and Jerusalem locks out.
That is a fantastic way to put it. Babylon is the church that becomes a marketplace, and Jerusalem is the church that becomes a fortress. And the text points out something really fascinating about their dynamic. These two women do not actually like each other.
I noticed that. They have completely different theologies and different histories. They should logically be enemies.
They hate each other. But, and this is the key inside of the text, they unite around power. It is a purely transactional relationship. Babylon gets historical credibility from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem gets cultural reach from Babylon's power. They trade symbols and platforms just to survive.
And holding them together is this unholy trinity. The text breaks this down into 3 parts. The dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth. Can we translate that into plain English for you, the listener? What do these represent in this insurgency model?
Absolutely. The source maps it out like this. The dragon is the ultimate administrator, the source of the agenda. Satan, the ego, the raw will to dominate.
Okay, so the CEO of the operation.
And you have the beast from the sea. That represents political power. State violence. The text calls it violence baptized as order. It is the tank, the sword, the electric chair. It is physical might.
And the beast from the earth.
That is the false prophet. Think of this as the PR department. It is the religious authority that stands next to the tank and says, God wants you to use this tank. It sanitizes the state's violence.
So the false prophet makes the beast look presentable. He puts a halo on the tank.
Exactly. The synthesis here is that the adversary uses religion, represented by Babylon and Jerusalem, and politics, represented by the beasts, to create a structural monster that looks eternal. It looks like God and country. It looks like heritage and law. It feels completely unstoppable.
But the source insists that it is secretly rotting from the inside out.
Because of the thorn. This composite face literally flinches when the true kingdom shows up. When the true kingdom acts with mercy that bypasses those rigid structures or shows an allegiance that ignores the national flags, the mask slips. The source has this incredible line. The true kingdom makes them irrelevant. And irrelevance terrifies them more than judgment.
Irrelevance terrifies them more than judgment. That hits so hard. They want to be the main characters of history, even if they have to be the villains, but the insurgency just ignores them.
It bypasses them completely. It renders their oaths brittle. If you build an entire system on fear and people suddenly stop being afraid, you don't just lose control. You cease to exist. The insurgency wins simply by stopping feeding the beast.
So let's bring this home. We have this invisible army, this parasite, this embedded thorn. We have a terrified bully building monuments to hide his insecurity. How does this war actually end? Because if I am an insurgent, I am waiting for the signal to attack. I am waiting for D-Day.
And that is where the text subverts our expectations one last time. It says, this is not the story of how a nation was saved. It is the story of how nations are outlived.
Outlived. That implies waiting, deep endurance.
The grand strategy is outlasting. The source says the kingdom wins without witnesses. It buries its dead and rises again somewhere completely unexpected. It doesn't consolidate power. It persists. It is playing the longest possible game.
There is an image in the outro that really stuck with me. It says the insurgents look like ordinary neighbors.
They are in kitchens, hospitals, and back alleys. They aren't the ones on the stages with the microphones. They are the ones doing the actual work of the kingdom. Mercy, truth, faithfulness, completely in the dark. They are the nurse holding the hand of the dying patient, the teacher staying late, the neighbor feeding the hungry without ever posting about it online.
It is almost anticlimactic. We naturally want the movie ending with the big explosion and the flag waving over the rubble, but the text says the war has grown quieter, which is exactly how they know they are winning.
It is the silence of the leaven working through the dough. It changes the molecular structure of the whole loaf without ever making a sound. It is not about capturing the capital city. It is about becoming the new reality underneath the old one until the old one just flakes away.
So what does this all mean for you? If you buy into the thesis of the Thorn, how does it actually change your Tuesday morning?
I think it radically challenges the way we are taught to look at power and success. We are trained to look for the big, the loud, the victorious. We doom scroll the news, looking for the end of the world. But this source tells us to look for the small, the quiet, the enduring. It tells us that the real history of the world is absolutely not being written in the headlines.
It is being written in unseen acts of faithfulness.
Exactly. It leaves us with that final provocative image. The text says the true king reigns from a scarred body.
And calls it triumph.
The insurgency wins because it never sought the throne the world offered in the first place. The lamb overcomes simply by being the lamb. The adversary has to create complex systems, alliances, counterfeits, and massive PR campaigns just to survive. The insurgency just is. It exists. And its very existence is the undoing of the lie.
It reminds me of that old idea that truth doesn't need to be defended like a lion. You just let it loose and it defends itself.
That is it, exactly. The thorn doesn't need to mount an attack. It just needs to remain embedded.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought to chew on. Something that builds on this text but wasn't explicitly spelled out in the chapters we covered today.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If the true king reigns from a scarred body and this insurgency wins by outlasting rather than conquering, what does that mean for your own scars? We spend so much time in the adversary's system, trying to hide our wounds, trying to project strength and perfection because the world demands it.
Because the world says scars are a liability. They are proof of weakness.
Exactly. But in the logic of the Thorn, what if your unhealed grief, your failures, the places where you have been broken, what if those aren't your disqualifications? What if those are your actual credentials for the insurgency? If the empire flexes in the mirror to hide its fear, maybe the rebellion simply shows its scars to prove it has nothing left to hide.
That completely reorients how you view your own pain. You aren't broken machinery. You are proof that the empire couldn't finish you off.
Well, that is a lot to process. A spiritual insurgency, an insecure adversary, and a victory that looks a lot like just surviving and quietly loving your neighbor. The Thorn certainly gives you a radically different set of lenses to view reality with.
It definitely exposes the hidden mechanics, just like we promised at the top. It makes you realize the real war is happening right in your living room.
I think I am going to be looking for those insurgents in my own neighborhood now, the ones who look totally unremarkable but are secretly hollowing out the empire with kindness.
They are everywhere. You just have to know what you're looking for.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. It has been a heavy one, but a deeply fascinating one. Keep your eyes open, watch out for the counterfeits, and remember, sometimes the quietest things are the most dangerous. We will catch you on the next deep dive.